Happy Sunday. You are listening to Rainbow Radio. Coming up next is In My Humble Opinion. I'm your host, Niceguy Eddie. I want to read you something, folks. This is something that every American should know. Probably not too many people could say it by word, however. The following is the text of the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution. This is going to be important in a moment, so pay attention. It reads, "The right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly," and this is the important part, "describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized." That is also followed up by the Sixth Amendment. "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense." Now that's kind of important. You hear a lot about First Amendment and Second Amendment, but very few people, depending on if you're on the left or on the right, very few people go beyond that. And those two that I just read are particularly important. Now, if you caught the event on my Facebook page, one of the things I teased was to say that the police can essentially take as whatever they want from you without any reason whatsoever. Well, wait a second. What happened to probable cause? What happened to security and the persons or things to be seized? What happened to warrants? What happened to the rights of speedy trials? Well, maybe you should Google a name. Charles Clark. This is a name that came across both my Facebook feeds and my Daily Cause feeds earlier in the week. Charles Clark was traveling back through Kentucky, I believe it was, and he was stopped at the airport by a couple of police officers. They questioned him. Turns out he had actually smoked a joint earlier in the day. And he also happened to be traveling with $11,000 in cash. Now, the $11,000 in cash, according to Mr. Clark, came from odd jobs he had done, gifts from families, some of his mother's Social Security benefits, various places, and he had saved it up over 5 years, and he was going to go to college. He was traveling back to his family home in Florida with this money on his person. The cops questioned him for a while. Did not charge him with anything, weren't that concerned about the marijuana, but they did say the money smelled a bit like marijuana, and they decided to take his $11,000. Now, as you might imagine, there was a bit of a disagreement there. A short struggle ensued, and Clark was eventually arrested and charged with assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Now, of course, those charges were dropped because they weren't really interested in Mr. Clark. They just wanted to take his money. This is a process called civil asset forfeiture. And this particular money was seized under the Department of Justice's Equitable Sharing Program, which entitles local and state law enforcement agencies to up to 80% of the proceeds from seized cash and property. Property could include, say, a drug dealer's sports car. They auction it off, they keep 80%. Here's the problem, though. Nobody was charged with a crime, and there was no warrant for this, and this was they just picked a dude at random and took his money. Hang on a second. What's going on here? And by the way, how often does this happen? Well, from 2008 to 2013, according to the Arlington, Virginia-based Institute for Justice, this program, this equitable sharing program, has amounted to $6.8 billion in cash and property that has been seized, liquidated, and redistributed. Now, what about Mr. Clark here? Doesn't he have rights? Well, you'd think under the Fourth and or Sixth Amendment he should have rights to this, and how do they just take his money without... And to this day, he has never been charged. Never been charged, never been tried. The reason this works, and the reason the way that these weaselly lawyers get around this, is to claim that it's actually the money that's being charged, that the money is somehow bad. It's not Mr. Clark that did anything, but they suspect something about the money. Well, obviously you can't put money on trial, but it doesn't matter because the Fourth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment only protects people, not money. So the cops didn't have to worry about Mr. Clark's Fourth Amendment rights because they really, really, really wanted to put that money in jail and teach it a lesson. Now, I can already hear some of you, and I've had the same evil thought for just the slightest moment. What the hell was he doing walking around with $11,000 in cash in his pockets? Don't do that, folks. Don't blame the victim here. This kid was not robbed by somebody, he wasn't thumped over the head in the men's room and had his bag stolen. This kid's money was taken by the United States government, by agents of the United States government, by the police. Police who are bound by the Constitution, or at least who should be. So let's not victim blame here, because victim blaming is exactly how this is never, ever going to stop. Should he have had his money in the bank? Should he have had a checkbook? Should he have had a prepaid credit card? Christ, anything would have been better than walking around with this much cash. Hell, American Express traveler's checks even. Those are refundable. But in all seriousness, don't do that. Don't give in to that temptation to victim blame, pretty much ever, because when you do that, you take the responsibility off the perpetrator and you let them get away with it, whether you want to or not. Don't do that. That's not relevant here. What is relevant is that his rights were violated, and we should not stand for that as a people. Now, if this bothers you, and it should, if you want to get excited about a constitutional issue, this is outrageous. This is outrageous. This is not. There's no hearing. There's no trial. I mean, you could say the money's dirty, but if Mr. Clark didn't commit a crime and can't be proven to have committed a crime, has never even been charged with a crime, well, wait, why should he suffer a loss? How are you secure in your persons, houses, papers, and effects if somebody can simply arbitrarily take them? And the answer is you're not. Okay, and this happens quite a bit, and usually it's in excess of $10,000 and up. And by the way, you can in fact go to court and try to get this back, and some people have managed to do that. But in so many cases, especially when this is in fact this man's life savings, how are you going to pay a lawyer? And oftentimes the cost of going to court is more than what you lost in the first place. Oh, sure, they'll offer you a settlement. They might give you some of it back for free, but how about all of it, seeing as how they didn't have the right to take any of it in the first place? Yeah. And because they're allowed to keep the money, of course, they're incentivized to do this. There's another part of this, another bit of outrage that I want to tell you about. This is the story of one Jerry Hartfeld. Now, Jerry Hartfeld was convicted of a murder supposedly committed in 1977. This conviction was overturned by a judge in 1980. Where is this man now? He's actually in prison. Still, 35 years later, has never been retried. Now, I'm going to read that again, that Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. Now, speedy, obviously, is a relative term, but I don't think it's measured in years, and it certainly is not 35 years long. So what's going on here? Well, basically, they overturned the conviction and then never let him go. And he's been there for 35 years. And somehow, most of this time, nobody's really noticed. Now, and by the way, I should add, this is not the only case like this. In fact, I can give you a couple more names if you want to see how often this happens. You could check out the case of Khalif Browder. He was served 3 years in Rikers Island without ever being convicted of a crime. Carlos Montero is in Rikers Island now, serving 7 years there without ever having been convicted. So, again, this kind of stuff happens. Okay? And when you think about how often these days convictions are overturned when DNA evidence is finally instituted, I mean, this goes beyond the fact that our justice system makes mistakes. This is a function of the mistake has been fixed, and the dude's been waiting for 35 years. We want to get excited about constitutional issues, folks. We got to go a little bit farther down the Constitution than the first and the second. We get very excited about first and second, I think rightly so. But you know what? There's more to it than that. And if the government is really going to abuse us of our rights, they're not going to abuse us of our first and second rights. It's these ones down here. It's the ability to take your money without any reason, simply because we are accusing the money of being bad, or keeping you in prison for 35 years without any cause. And I should add, and this should come as no surprise to anybody, the chances of running afoul of one of these bits of government excess is, of course, directly proportional to the amount of melanin in your skin, if you take my drift. Anyway, I think it's outrageous, and if you think it's outrageous, you should do something about it. You should write the ACLU. You should write your congressman. You should start thinking more about your rights and about the Constitution and about how they are slipping away. Why? Because of the war on drugs? Yeah, that's been effective. That's certainly taken drug crime out. And of course, marijuana is pretty much has as much momentum towards full legalization as gay marriage does these days. So, seriously, guys, what's going on here? This is how we're losing our country. It's not about the liberals. It's not even about the Christians. And hell, it doesn't even have to be about corporatism. This is just simple, police corruption. And add on top of this what I've talked about before, which is the numerous times the police just simply kill unarmed people. Again, those that are exceptionally gifted with high melanin levels. Unarmed, not committing any crimes, no reason, no charges, no convictions, no punishment. Shoot them, take their money, imprison them without charge. But don't worry, because no one's really going to give a shit, and we're not going to do anything about it. I mean, hell, guy can go in and kill nine people in a church. They're all the same race. He's spouting racist things. He's wearing a Confederate flag, and yet we're going to argue over whether or not it was a hate crime. You know what? I do love my country. I really do. But sometimes I don't like the stupid shit that happens in it. And if you share that, again, something needs to be done. And I don't know what the answer is, but you know what? We're not going in the right direction with this. Anyway, sorry to start on such a down note, but there is a reason that I wanted to share those stories, and I wanted to share those rights, and I want to talk about how these things are being whittled away. And that is because people throw the word, usually extremists, throw the word police state around a lot. Well, if somebody were to make the statement that we're practically living in a police state, I'm not going to argue with them. I might nod my head. I might even say it myself from time to time. But it's very important to know what I'm talking about when I say that. And what I'm talking about is this kind of thing. Okay, I'm talking about rights being violated, lives being taken, property being seized, people being put in jail without charge or crime or trial. Okay, and then of course you've got all the prosecutorial misconduct that happens during the trial. Let's not forget that. That's what I'm talking about, and it's very important to keep that in perspective. Some people, when they say police state, mean something a little bit different. Earlier this week, I had a doctor's appointment. And as I parked my car and I was walking about a block away, and I'm walking down the street, and right in front of the post office, that's right next to my doctor's office, there were two young people camped out on this lemonade stand with posters and booklets and papers, and they were protesting. They had pictures of Vladimir Putin. They had pictures of Obama with a Hitler mustache. Yeah, seriously. And I thought, well, I got to talk to these guys. So I made sure they were going to be around later. I went to my appointment, and then when I came back out, they were there. And what ensued was a very interesting conversation. I'd like to play it for you now. And I'm going to add a little bit onto this at the end, but I'd like you to listen to this because this was an interesting exchange. Here we go.
So I'm driving up here and I see a picture of Obama down here with a Hitler mustache. So either you're trying to piss off Nazis, or you've got a you've got a point that you're making a pretty strong opinion.
Well, it's funny.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing here?
Well, it is telling that last week the Congress actually had to pass a bill. It was actually by John Conyers to not have the military arm a neo-Nazi battalion in Ukraine.
Okay.
Now, this has been a year ago. These guys basically overthrew the government with the help of the U.S. State Department, Obama.
Okay.
That's who violently overthrew the government. And that was with massive, backing by the U.S. government. These guys wear swastika armbands.
Really?
I mean, the fact that it took them a year to do this is ridiculous. The regime change policy under Bush, but really an acceleration of it to provoke Russia.
To provoke Russia.
To provoke Russia.
Hence here we go. Putin is not your enemy.
Yeah.
Wall Street is. So the point then being that we're trying to provoke Russia into what? War?
There's this line out there that, Russia is isolated. They're about to have the biggest St. Petersburg economic forum they've ever had, because what's happening is a new financial system is coming together, which is not dependent on the transatlantic financial system, which is completely overburdened with bad financial paper, more so even than the 2008 crash. So we're headed for a new meltdown, and they're trying to save their system by another war.
They being the U.S.
The financial elites, the City of London, Wall Street. I mean, that's who Obama, after all, is a puppet for. Yeah, and even
Okay, well, okay. I mean, well, it strikes me. It seems a bit odd that because I'm just not ready to believe that anybody is going to support going to war with Russia certainly over Ukraine, a non-NATO ally, or even over Crimea, which was sort of the flashpoint there for a while. I mean,
The fact that they haven't yet. Well, I mean, think about the fact that during the Cuban Missiles Crisis, you had two leaders who actually were sane enough to want to try to avoid nuclear war.
Absolutely.
With Obama, that's not what you have.
Okay, so two questions. And first of all, impeach Obama on what grounds?
Well, there's a whole slew of war crimes. You can start with Libya.
War crimes then. War crimes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I assume then you would also ascribe the same war crimes of the previous administration. I mean, this isn't anything new.
Sure.
Okay. Then the other thing is that, why don't you go ahead and tell me about the alternative then? What do you propose? What are you supporting then in a positive way?
There are alternatives which are coming together now in terms of the ability to have some sort of transition presidency.
Okay.
And you can look at this.
I mean, but who's do you have a candidate in mind, or do you have? I mean, what are the
yeah, sure. Probably the leading, most qualified candidate at this point is Martin O'Malley, who has qualified himself not as someone who's simply throwing his hat in and saying, I'd be a good guy in 2016.
Sure.
But he's immediately saying, look, we've had problems with both parties, is that you've had presidencies that have basically been crowned by Wall Street.
Right. And I assume you would not feel any differently about Secretary Clinton or any of the Republican campaign.
Yeah, right.
At this point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she basically hoarded herself to Obama. She destroyed her credibility, any shred of dignity that she had for the Obama administration, which is a criminal administration. So she's definitely unqualified. You've got a lot of candidates that are unqualified.
Well, I don't need you to convince me of anybody on the right, because I'm ready to write them all off. Who else would you say on the left? How about the other big two that get thrown around? I mean, Sanders, of course, who's running, and Warren, who was trying to be drafted there. What would you say about them?
I don't think Sanders is I don't think he's very serious. I don't think he's a serious person.
Okay.
I don't think he's seriously running for president.
Okay.
I mean, it is kind of strange that Sanders is getting so much coverage, but O'Malley...
Oh, nothing.
Nothing. And it's very clear that his candidacy is seen as very threatening to Wall Street.
Sure. Well, I would imagine, though, so would a Sanders. I mean, so would Sanders' presidency if it were serious.
Put it this way. Yeah. O'Malley is saying the most important single policy would be reinstating Glass-Steagall. Now, you know what Glass-Steagall would do.
Absolutely.
I mean, Glass-Steagall would create the base. I mean, when FDR put in Glass-Steagall as part of the New Deal, a lot of these guys ended up going to jail.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to pin any one piece of legislation for the whole financial crisis, it was the repeal of Glass-Steagall. I mean, there's no question about it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
I mean, I'm not saying that single-handedly caused it, but that was the largest contributor.
So Bernie Sanders is a senator. He could introduce Glass-Steagall if he wanted to into the Senate. He hasn't done it, right? So some of this stuff is just distraction, smoke and mirror. So, there is a leading option that you have in terms of the ability to bring institutional figures in now around a personality like O'Malley, so that you could actually get an aversion of the type of disaster that we're headed for with the collapse of this financial system immediately. I mean, Greece is, we're looking at a situation where if Greece defaults on their payments to the IMF, this could actually bring down the entire transatlantic financial system. So this is a very short-term question.
Americans don't talk about their president that way. Go to hell to Russia.
I hope somebody heard that. We had a bit of a counter demonstration there. That's actually cool. I just hope she don't think I'm with these two.
Very brief counter demonstration.
No, that was good. I hope that picked up. That was hey, that's free speech. That's America right there. That's the best part. That's the best part of everything. So I see some of your signs are LaRouche pack. Is that I see actually all your signs are LaRouche pack. So what can you tell me about that outfit?
Well, LaRouche and his wife were the authors of the policy, which has now been adopted by about 2/3 of the planet, which is that you've got to have a financial system which is based on the capability of nations to advance through the promotion of the creative and productive powers of their population.
Sure.
And that's exactly what is emerging, and even in terms of distinct specific policies among the BRICS nations, which, just for people who don't know, it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Mm-hmm. And, really the model for what they're doing comes from what, in better days, the United States frankly used to do, which is not a speculative system of financial values, but it's a credit for development orientation, where you actually have cooperation between countries around major development projects whose value is clear, and it's based on the creation of real physical wealth through the improvement of the productive capabilities. Like in South America, China is helping South America build a transcontinental railroad at this point, from the Atlantic coast of Brazil to the Pacific coast of Peru. I mean, we've had a transcontinental railroad here for over 100 years. Why hasn't South America had one? It's a question of the financial system.
We have one that's been falling apart for 100 years too. So.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, right.
All right. So, and I take it then you guys are not generally in support of the TPP then, or any of the free trade agreements as they've existed. I would say since NAFTA, going back to NAFTA.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, we agree on that much anyway. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Wow. Oh boy, where do I even start? I tell you what, because it's kind of important. Let's start off with the things that absolutely made sense. I don't know what y'all know about Martin O'Malley, but he doesn't get a lot of press. He gets an order of magnitude less press than Bernie Sanders, who gets probably an order of magnitude less than Hillary Clinton. But he's not a bad guy, and he is right now known as the Glass-Steagall candidate. Okay. They mentioned the speculative nature of our economy and the fact that the presidencies have been crowned by Wall Street, and that's not something any of us are too happy about either. Certainly, corporate money, it has way too much influence over our politics. Not only would I reinstate Glass-Steagall, but I would overturn Citizens United and have some serious campaign finance reform. The other thing I want to agree with him on is Sanders not being serious. I like Bernie Sanders. I took one of these polls and I was 90-some% allied with Sanders on all the issues. I was something like 83% allied with Hillary Clinton. I'll take the certain B- candidate over the risky A candidate any day of the week. So, you know what? Pragmatic compromise will rule the day. But I do like Sanders. But as far as him not being very serious, I mean, if you think about his career in the Senate, it's been very loud, very rhetorical, and not particularly productive, not compared with many of his colleagues. He's an idealist, and his ideals are admirable. But yeah, he's not going to be president. He's not going to be president any more than Ted Cruz is going to be president from the right. I think he will make some good points. I think he will get the public speaking about certain issues, and I think that's good. I do think that's good. But I kind of agree with his judgment there. Let's face it, I think the Democratic nomination is going to be Hillary Clinton. I know she's been seen as inevitable before, but you know what? In all seriousness, if I got to put my money on somebody winning, and I don't mean who I support, I mean who I think will win, I think it's Hillary Clinton. I think it's Hillary Clinton all the way through, but, it's a long way away. It's a long way away. Anyway, that's what he got right. Also, the bill by John Conyers, yes, the neo-Nazi group in question is, of course, the Azov Battalion. They basically are who's operating in the parts of Ukraine that are having incursions with Russia right now. They were receiving U.S. support, and they don't exactly have swastikas on their armbands, but it is a Nazi symbol, commonly known as the Wolf's Angel. Basically, it's a white supremacist symbol. It was used by very similar to what was used by the SS. It is basically a Nazi symbol. It's not literally a swastika, but it's close enough. Now, before I get into the things that he really got wrong, I want to talk about Ukraine, and I want to use Ukraine as an example of something that again, as they say it makes sense, but we have to think about this. And this is one of those issues. I think almost every issue, economic, social, almost everything is trivial compared to foreign policy. And the U.S. has a very long history of interventionist foreign policy with a pretty particularly shitty record. Of course, there's these guys who we are arming in Ukraine because the previous president, Viktor Yanukovych, was apparently getting cold feet about becoming a NATO ally and joining the Eurozone. So, we started putting money here and there, and eventually there was some civil unrest, and of course he was thrown out and President Poroshenko came in his place. But violently overthrown with backing from the State Department and U.S. and Obama and doing all of this, that is a little bit less clear. In fact, and this is outrageous to some people, but there are people who are even questioning whether or not to call this a coup. Now, the problem with the word coup is, like the word hate crime and terrorism, it evokes certain imagery and it triggers certain policies. Do I believe it was a coup? Yeah, you know what? This wasn't exactly a free and fair election when the guy's term was up. So yeah, I think coup is a fair way of looking at it. But as to the extent of U.S. involvement and how much we were involved in the violent overthrow, that is a matter of greater speculation. And then, of course, there's the purpose of us doing this, but that's besides the point. In any case, after this happens, of course, the new government was weak, it was corrupt, and it was losing control. And Russia decided they were going to flex their muscles, show us how big their dicks are, and take back Crimea and start making real unrest and really backing unrest in eastern Ukraine. Now, this is when the U.S. finally said, okay, we're going to help these guys out. We're going to protect them from Russia. Oh, shit, we're giving weapons to neo-Nazis. Better not. Maybe we better not do that. Now, I would just chalk Ukraine up to another shitty outcome of the U.S. getting involved in any way in the affairs of another country. It's not the first time. It's not, sadly, not going to be the last time. It's not even the first time under Obama. I mean, you know, we can talk about Libya, we can talk about the Arab Spring for the most part, but I would say with Obama, the other one, of course, is Syria, where we had a really bad guy who was facing of being overthrown, and he was gassing the rebels and gunning down the rebels, and we had to help the rebels. Oh shit! Wait a second. Those guys are former Al Qaeda fighters, and half of them went and formed and joined ISIS. Oh crap, man, we're arming our enemies again. Now, unless anybody thinks I'm sitting here just bashing Obama, I've said it previously, but let's look at some other people's records. Oh, like Reagan getting the Russians out of Afghanistan by arming the Mujahideen and leading to the creation of the Taliban. Reagan keeping Iran in check by arming Saddam. His successor then having to get Saddam out of Kuwait, and in the process, in the aftermath of that, inspiring the creation of Al Qaeda. And then that man's son fighting Al Qaeda and the Taliban, somehow deciding he's going to take on Saddam as well. And in Saddam's ouster, also creates ISIS. So, not a really good record on the other side either. And I didn't even get into Panama, Grenada, Libya, Iran-Contra. And hell, you can go before that and say Vietnam. Okay? In fact, I think you have to go all the way back to the 1950s. I think you have to go back all the way to Korea to find any time the U.S. has really messed around with another country and that there was any positive, long-lasting outcome at all. And I say that merely on the basis of the fact that South Korea still exists and it is a prosperous world economic power, whereas North Korea is a fourth world shithole. Okay? And arguably the worst place on earth to live outside of Somalia. So, yeah, I think that given having a North Korea that's twice the size and 3 times the population would probably not have been a favorable outcome, but that gave us confidence. We did something, and we kind of had a tie, and it kind of worked out in our favor, and then we never stopped. And we decided we were going to save the world from communism, so we went into Vietnam. That didn't work out at all. 50,000 men died, and guess what? Vietnam is a united country today and has been communist ever since. Didn't really work out very well, did it? And again, foreign policy is hard. Foreign policy is one of those things that it seems so simple at the time. Terrible dictator, people suffering, rebels crying for help. We're the good guys. Help them. And inevitably, the people that we help end up being 10 times as bad as the people we were trying to protect them from in the first place. This has happened time and time and time again. Now, does that mean I believe that we should be an isolationist country? No, I don't. I think that's a tough sell. I mean, again, there's a brutal dictator and people are suffering and the rebels are asking us for our help. And when you perceive injustice and you want to help and you have the means to do it, you know, it's tough to say no. And I'm not even sure it's always right to say no. But man, do we have a really shitty track record. And very few of these things have worked out in our favor. All that being said, their point was that we fomented violent unrest in Ukraine, overthrew the president in order to, what, protect our economic interests maybe, pressure them into joining NATO or the Eurozone? No, nothing like that, nothing sensible, but to provoke a war with Russia in order to save an economic system. And by the way, you heard the reference to the Cuban Missile Crisis, so we're not talking about a conventional war here. We're not talking about another Iraq or something like that, or let's just get Putin out of the Ukraine. We're talking about thermonuclear war. And if you think I'm exaggerating, now this is funny because after we're done talking, this gentleman passed me some of his paperwork, and I want to read from you something here. This is the second paragraph of something that says LaRouche Oust Merkel and Obama now. Second paragraph, to prevent thermonuclear war and the extinction of the human species, we must remove Barack Obama from office in the U.S. as an integral part of a process leading to the creation of the new presidency of the U.S. over the next 18 months. So in other words, Barack Obama is going to start World War III, nuclear World War III with Russia before he leaves office. Now, you heard that whole exchange, and you notice he didn't actually come out and say that, and that's kind of important, because if you start out, if I had asked him, why do you want to impeach Obama, and he had said, to prevent thermonuclear war with Russia and the extinction of the human race, I would have smiled and backed away slowly while keeping my eyes on him the entire time. That whole point is ridiculous. And by the way, while war can be profitable, I don't see a profit to be made from nuclear war. And especially between two countries like the U.S. and Russia. Look, I know it was World War II that got us out of the Great Depression, but it was a different world then. And speaking of the Great Depression, remember that this was all going to be triggered over Greece. Greece is going to default. They're not going to pay the IMF, and the whole transatlantic financial system is going to come crashing down. Well, let's start with transatlantic financial system. There is no transatlantic financial system. Now, let me explain that. I don't mean that there's not people on both sides of the Atlantic that have treaties and that do trade, and that there's the London and there's New York and there's Frankfurt and Paris and that we exchange money and all that. Obviously, there's transatlantic trade, there's transatlantic financial stuff going on. But it's not called the transatlantic financial system by anybody, by any legitimate economist. You will not. There is no Wikipedia article for the transatlantic financial system. I looked it up. There isn't one. If you Google it, the first 2 or 3 pages, and then I gave up, because let's face it, after the 3rd page of Google responses, you're looking at garbage. But the very first one that came up was a LaRouche page. And then after that, it was nothing but other far right and far left conspiracy pages. These are the only people that talk about the transatlantic financial system. Later on, he mentioned the City of London, Wall Street and the City of London. Now, the City of London, for those of you who don't know, and this is legitimate. For those of you who don't know, the City of London is a small, independently incorporated mini city within what you think of as London. There are actually 2 distinct geographic areas, and I believe there's a YouTuber named CGP Grey. If you look at his channel, he does an excellent write-up of what the City of London is. But they're not, what they're talking about, the City of London, they also sometimes say the British. This is code, guys. This actually, what they're saying is Jews, okay? And I don't mean Jews in the old-fashioned sense. They also say the financial elites. I'm not talking about Jews I'm talking about the Jews that actually, own everything and control all the banks and are pulling the world's strings and everything like that. And apparently they want the U.S. and Russia to go to war because money. And this makes sense to people. Now, here's the thing. About Greece bringing that whole system crashing down. Okay? Greece does have problems. Okay? And they had problems before. They almost defaulted on their debt before. Okay? It didn't bring the whole system crashing down, but it did force a bailout. And part of it was because they were afraid of the domino effect. It could spread to Portugal, Spain, Italy. So they bailed them out, the Germans mostly, and the rest of the Eurozone bailed out Greece. Now, the problem was that the way they were structured now was they were isolated. They were financially isolated in a way that if they defaulted, there would be no domino effect, which means that what this guy's claiming is essentially bogus. Greece could go bankrupt, Greece could default, and it really won't hurt anybody other than Greece. And Greece is being screwed over as it is because of all the austerity measures that have been put in by the European central banks. I'll get into austerity in another show, but here's the thing, guys. It sucks. It's a dumb idea. It will never serve any good purpose whatsoever. If you hear somebody giving you an economic policy that's based on austerity, hit them in the head with a brick and walk away, because austerity only serves to destroy economies. That's all it can do. It is the exact opposite of what any economy needs. So is Greece in trouble? Yes. But is the rest of the world in trouble? No. And I'll remind you, Greece is a minuscule economy. That's part of its problem in the first place. It's an insignificant economy. Greece by itself is not going to take out anybody. Hell, in 2008, the U.S. economy collapsed. And yes, while it was threatening to take the rest of the world with it, we're still here. There haven't really been any new financial systems solved. And yes, I do understand. I don't mean to be insensitive to anybody who's still looking for work or hasn't quite gotten back on their feet since the 2008 crash. I know some of those people personally. But the fact of the matter is the world is still here. And our financial system is still here. And the same stock market that crashed in 2008 is now at record highs. So if the U.S. economy could not destroy everything when it collapsed and create a new financial system, fucking Greece is not going to do that. Not in the Greeks' most wild delusions of grandeur is their economy that important. Now, a couple of other things. Now, remember, too, we mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I mentioned war with Russia. Here's the thing. Are we provoking Russia? Are we doing some brinksmanship? Sure. But he claims that Kennedy and Khrushchev were sane enough to want to avoid nuclear war. Well, that is one way to look at it. We did, after all, avoid nuclear war. But what I see is two guys waiting to call each other's bluff. I don't know that was sane. It worked out. But the idea here that Obama wants nuclear war, that this is not just a risk of his policy, but that it is in fact his plan. How did we get here? How did we get down this rabbit hole of insanity? Okay? Seriously, how does this happen? Well, this is the thing. Problem with LaRouche, the LaRouche camp and LaRouche's followers are not necessarily the relatively sensible policies they start out telling you. You know, reinstate Glass-Steagall. I mean, hey, I would love to see that. I would vote for Martin O'Malley for that reason alone if I thought he had a chance to win. Okay? By the way, he did get one thing wrong about Glass-Steagall. Nobody went to jail over Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was a banking regulatory act that basically set up parameters for people to be FDIC insured. Nobody went to jail over Glass-Steagall. He may have been thinking of something else, but it wasn't Glass-Steagall. Okay, that being said, it would take a lot of the risk of the very risky speculation out of our economy. It should never have been repealed. It was one of the dumbest things Clinton did, and it was the single biggest contributor to the financial meltdown. But again, nobody went to jail over it. Okay, and putting it back in isn't going to send anybody to jail either. You would need something else. But here's how we get to this insanity. And this is my warning to you. This is how I'm going to inoculate you from falling for conspiracy theories. It always starts out with something sensible, and they always give you facts that are in fact true in and of themselves. I didn't necessarily disagree with any of the statements he made, although some of them were mischaracterized and exaggerated. For the most part, I found myself nodding my head quite a bit, because he started out with relatively sensible stuff. Wall Street has too much influence over our politics. I agree. We should put in Glass-Steagall. I agree. Martin O'Malley seems like a decent guy. You know, all of this stuff. Oh, we got shitty foreign policy. I can't argue with that. Okay, now, all of these facts, I'm nodding my head, I agree with, they're absolutely true. But then we get to, Obama is therefore trying to provoke Russia into a thermonuclear war. How the fuck do you get from that to that? Well, there's a gap there. There's an abyss that if you're on the other side of and you believe it, and I'm sitting on the other side, we're not going to bridge that. The conversation ends basically right there because we're not going to get that. And the problem is, if he were here in front of me, I could already hear him because I've argued with these kinds of people before. Well, what did you disagree with? What did I get wrong? And really, I mean, I know I poked at a couple of these things, but he didn't get anything wrong. The problem isn't that his facts were wrong or that his evidence was false. The problem is that it's nowhere near sufficient to making the case. And this, of course, is the other aspect of a conspiracy theory is, of course, lack of evidence is evidence of a conspiracy. No, lack of evidence means you've got nothing to go on. Okay? But, of course, the conspiracy theorists will tell you that's what they want you to think. They're hiding it so well. Oh, they're hiding it so well, but we're standing on a sidewalk in front of the post office talking about it. That's how well hidden this conspiracy theory is. If there's a conspiracy, we don't know about it. And if we know about it, the conspiracy ain't going very far. Okay? Now, the other thing about conspiracies, well, there's a couple things. First of all, I want to say this, too. This is the other reason why it's dangerous to go down any kind of conspiracy theory thinking. And why I generally speaking, am going to just end the conversation there. Because, well, it works a little bit like science, except completely not at all. Science, for example, when there's a theory in science, and a theory is stood up to evidence and scrutiny, and when we consider it fact, it's connected to all other aspects of science. These people who want to disprove evolution, for example, don't realize that you can't disprove evolution and still have chemistry and DNA and physics and other things that we know to be true that aren't even being challenged, because all of these things use a lot of the same principles. They're all interconnected. Well, conspiracy theories kind of do that as well. As soon as you, like, if someone is going to try to hook you into a conspiracy theory, they might start with John F. Kennedy. Because sure, there's a lot of reasonable people who might think that there was another shooter other than Oswald, but once you start down that path, anything goes. I mean, yeah, there could have been two people in the same place shooting at the same president at the same time. That'd be a hell of a coincidence, wouldn't it? But did you know that Abraham Lincoln's son once saved John Wilkes Booth's son's life? Yeah. crazy shit happens, okay? And you say, well, I'm supposed to believe that's a coincidence? Yeah, that's the definition of a coincidence. Now, do I think that's what happened? No, I'm not suggesting that that's what happened. But the problem is, once you start accepting it, how far do you go? Because there's no evidence to actually support any of the further allegations. Simply saying there's something doesn't mean you get to fill in whatever the hell you want. But you know why? How these things get filled in? They get filled in because conspiracies start connecting to one another. And then once you can connect 2 or 3 good conspiracies together, whoa, now I'm figuring it out, man. Now I'm seeing the big picture for the first time. No, you're not. You're connecting a bunch of bullshit together and fertilizing a very large field with it. That's all you're doing. You can't connect things together and think you have something unless these things independently of each other have some evidence to back them up. But man, it's every new conspiracy comes out just has to mention one element of another conspiracy, and then it all comes together, man. And that's how I felt I was talking to him. I have to tell you that it continued a little bit. Oh, well, the other thing about conspiracy theories, before I get to the next part, is here's the thing, folks. In 1970, maybe you could have had a good conspiracy. Although Richard Nixon probably thought that, and he kind of learned otherwise. And that was in the world before the internet. That was in a world that wasn't populated by 8 billion potential citizen journalists, all perfectly willing to stick it to the man and get the next viral YouTube video. If the government wants to stop me from saying anything, guess what? They're going to have to shoot me because I can take my phone, walk into a Starbucks, and broadcast whatever the hell I want. And there's nothing they can do about it. And once it hits the internet and somebody sees it, they send it to somebody else and it goes viral. You can't keep a lid on things. I'll give you the example, and I give this example a lot. It always makes the guy across the aisle from me at work laugh his ass off when I say it. But we live in a world where the President of the United States of America cannot get blown by an intern without the entire fucking world finding out about it. If President Clinton couldn't keep a fucking blowjob quiet, I guarantee you there's nobody shadowy figures behind the scenes controlling everything, and nobody knows about it, except, of course, the guy sitting in front of the post office talking to me on the sidewalk. He must know everything. Now, what kind of people follow these things? That's the thing about LaRouche. The biggest problem with the LaRouche camp is LaRouche himself. The man has delusions of grandeur. This follower of his says that he was the author of the economic policy that 3/4. He wasn't the author of shit. Okay, I've been to business school. I've taken several semesters worth of macroeconomic theory, and guess what? Not one time was the LaRouche theory ever even talked about, because it doesn't fucking exist. He may support policies that Keynes and Friedman and others have talked about, but the fact is he's not authoring anything. Okay, nobody really takes Lyndon LaRouche seriously other than Lyndon LaRouche and his little cult of followers. Okay, now he mentions China and Russia, and he mentioned them in very positive light. And then he went on to say, and this is after we were done, this was after I turned off the record button, and we started talking, and he talked about how we are living in a police state. And I said, wait a second, you've got a sign here saying Putin's not your enemy. You're telling me China and Russia are free, but we're living in a police state. Well, if you think China's so bad, this is showing your ignorance. Your information is several years out of date. Really? Because I'm pretty sure last year I was hearing on NPR about some journalist who was put in jail, and I happen to know how China censors the internet and whatnot, and whatnot. And come to think of it, Russia put gays in jail. We're not even allowed to. There's actually a law against talking about pro-LGBT stuff in Russia, which I find particularly amusing because my blog, Behind the United States, gets more hits from Russia than any other country. So fuck you, Putin. But in any case, he's comparing the police state in the U.S. and he's looking at China and Russia favorably. Now, here's the thing. This is the irony here. Think about this scene. He and I are having a very critical conversation about the government in front of the U.S. Post Office. In other words, a federally owned building. He has giant signs of foreign leaders saying these guys are nice, and a giant picture of Obama with a Hitler mustache. Not to mention shaking hands with Dick Cheney and everything else, because of course, Obama and Cheney are like BFFs, right? According to these guys. So he is sitting here protesting the government with a sign mocking Obama to the point that a passerby swore at us and honked her horn in front of a federally owned building. Now, wait a minute. Are you telling me that if you did this in China and President Xiaoping's picture was on it, you had a picture of President Xiaoping and his hair was done up in the style of Kim Jong-un, are you telling me that you would last half an hour? These guys were there all day. They'd been there a while when I got there. I came by an hour later. They were still there, and they were still there when I left. And I haven't read about any activists being arrested in Plymouth, Michigan anytime recently. So my God. I mean, we're living in a police state. Look, I laid out how we're living in a police state. These guys were openly mocking the government in front of a federal building, right there on the sidewalk, and passing out propaganda to the passerbys. They weren't arrested. They weren't chased off. So don't tell me about how great Russia and China are. Again, you dig deep enough down into these rabbit holes, it just becomes idiotic. By the way, Lyndon LaRouche used to be a much more open anti-Semite. Like I say, British is now how he talks about Jews. He was also an AIDS denier. He did not believe that AIDS came from HIV, and he felt that everybody that got AIDS should be locked up and isolated from the population, to protect us all. But, it's a virus. You can wear a condom or just, not have sex with an infected person. No. What are you talking about? We got to wrap people up. And of course, at the time, that was mostly thought of as a gay disease. So let's face it, this guy was just for locking up gay people. Yeah, great. No wonder his follower likes Putin so much. Okay. On top of that, he's also a global warming denier. Now, for those of you out there rolling their eyes right now, it's okay. You're entitled to your opinion about global warming. It's all right if you're wrong. The scientists aren't right because I agree with me, guys. I'm right because I agree with them. But you know what? This guy disagrees with. He doesn't accept global warming. Why? Well, because it's a socialist tool to take over the economy. Well, here's the thing: that it could be doesn't mean that it is, and that it could be or is doesn't mean that the science behind it is somehow invalid or even in the slightest bit connected to how the socialists might use it. Okay? So again, this is dangerous stuff. And and the reason it's dangerous, it's not the policies that they're agitating for. Like I said, most of the policies I'm fine with. The problem is when they come from a worldview that believes that Barack Obama is doing everything that he can do to provoke thermonuclear war with Russia. This is a level of paranoia that truly requires medication. It does. It's nuts. And you know what? I don't know. But, I don't take anything away from it. It was an interesting conversation. By the way, I mentioned the Kennedy assassination as a conspiracy theory. We did start talking about the Kennedy assassination, and it wasn't long before he was talking about the real story behind 9/11 either. Now, again, guys, do I think we know everything there is to know about Kennedy or 9/11 or anything else? Fluoride in the water or, I don't know, the microwaves and coming through our teeth, whatever shit you want to make up. No, I don't. I'm not an expert. I don't think most people are. But just because we don't know everything doesn't mean that we don't know anything. And it doesn't give you license to simply fill in whatever bullshit you want and treat it like it's fact. Okay? It's fun. Don't get me wrong. But it's fun in the way that believing in Santa Claus when you were a kid is fun. Okay? I believed in Santa Claus a lot longer than most of my peers. Not because I really believed in Santa Claus, but because I noticed the presents tended to be a little bit better and life was a little more interesting. Well, that's the adult version of that is conspiracy theories, my friends. And you know what? The further I dug into this rabbit hole, the funnier and funnier it became. I'm going to go ahead and post these two flyers that I got on my blog over at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. If anybody is curious and going to reading them, here's another highlight from it. The real danger lies in the fact that Obama is applying the same deadly state of mind to confrontation with Russia and China and leading the world closer than ever to thermonuclear annihilation. Wow. And I thought he was a wussy. You may have heard the expression that if you go far enough to the left, you're going to come around to the right, or if you go far enough to the right, you're going to come around to the left. Yeah. But along the way, you're going to find Lyndon LaRouche. Oh my God. All right, I got to end on a lighter note here, guys. And this was pretty light, and I hope you all appreciate my little anecdotes today. I know foreign policy is not necessarily all that interesting, but again, never think it's simple. Never think you have a simple answer. Somebody tells you there's a simple answer to a problem that involves another country. They don't have the answer. They're just being morons, okay? And I do it too. Don't get me wrong. I'm a hypocrite here. I do it too. It's tempting. But foreign policy is hard. And if you think you're going to make a foreign policy decision based solely on ideology, you're going to end up with a really shitty result, no matter what ideology you choose and no matter what solution you pursue. All right, I got to end on something a little bit light, so I want to end on Rachel Dolezal. This is the disgraced former head of the, Spokane, Washington. This was the disgraced former president of the NAACP chapter in Spokane, Washington. She was forced to resign after they found out that, after however long she'd been employed there, that she's not in fact black. Now, the NAACP, in fact, does hire whites, but what they do have some misgivings about is white people pretending to be black. Yes, this person so strongly identifies with black people that she decided she was going to become black. I don't think it works that way. I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things, but I don't think it works that way. In fact, I think most blacks found that kind of insulting. It does seem the Spokane chapter of the NAACP did anyway. Now, I don't know if there's a crime here, but this is certainly very poor judgment, poor taste. This. I'm just going to come right out and say it. This woman's a nutbag. Okay. And I don't, that part is not a moral judgment. I've seen, you read a bit about her upbringing. She had some really whack job, funny mentalist parents. You know what? There's a lot of reasons that this may have happened. Okay. A lot of reasons, and it would have been fine enough by itself and we could have had a nice discussion about race, except that they had to go and invent a new word. Transracial. She's transracial. She identifies as black. And oh my God, did the right wing and Fox News and Eric Erickson and Keith Abloh jump all over this shit. Oh my God, they love it. Suddenly now we can mock liberals. Because now, apparently you can identify as a new race and just decide to be black one day. See, I wonder, now, if that were possible, I would imagine there'd be an awful lot of black people who suddenly decided they were going to be white, right? I mean, but it don't work that way, does it? You can't just, it doesn't work that way. Oh my God. And the problem is that transracial was now being conflated with transgender. Okay. And I got into some pretty serious arguments with people on Media Matters and some other, in Cause and some other places, regarding, and on Facebook for that matter, regarding why me and us liberals and us progressives are so quick and so strong-minded about respecting transgender identities, but we're so quick to dismiss poor Miss Dolezal and her transracialism. Okay. Look, on one side, the transgender side, you have at least 40 years of clinical research, countless academic papers, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of actual cases, not to mention about a dozen or so people that I've gotten to know pretty personally. It's a thing. It exists. It's very well, okay, it's not very well understood. I don't want to overstate the case here, but it's relatively well understood. My pardons to all of my trans friends who are listening to this and saying, no, there's all kinds of things they don't understand. I get that. But that is much more social than it is medical, and we're making strides. My point is, this is research, this is documented, this is a thing. Now compare that to basically some bullshit made up by some dopey white chick with a bad upbringing and poor judgment, who is basically, and this is where I think we've just collectively lost our fucking minds as a society. We're having a serious conversation about a woman who has spent the last 10 years of her life essentially in blackface. My God! Blackface! When the fuck did that become acceptable again? When nobody informed me of that. Nobody asked me my opinion. Nobody said, hey, do you think we should bring blackface back? What do you think? White people making their skin darker and, and frizzing their hair up and going out and acting like black people? I mean, we're talking about a woman who saw the movie Soul Man and not only thought it was a good movie, but apparently a good idea. This is ridiculous. And I swear to God, the fact that we're even why are we even talking about this? Now, okay. I'm going to back away. I'm going to back off of this for just 1 second here. And I mean, I swear to God, I almost threw up and I'm almost throwing up in my mouth a little bit to do this. But let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Let's realize that, hey, 50 years ago, maybe nobody knew anything about being transgender. Maybe the first transgender person to come along and come out and say, well, I know I look like a man, but I'm really a woman, was probably met with the same kind of derision that I'm heaping upon Miss Dolezal now. Hell, a lot of them still are 40 years later, okay? But here's my offer. Either you show me 40 years of clinical research and hundreds of thousands of cases of people being transracial and being transitioning from one race to another, or diagnose her with the symptoms of dysphoria, the depression, the anxiety, the suicidal tendencies, self-harm, low self-esteem, blah, 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 all that stuff that is tied up in dysphoria, and you diagnose her with that, and you tell me that that's tied to her racial identity. I'll believe a doctor. What I won't believe is some dopey white chick walking around in blackface because she had a bad upbringing, and poor judgment. I'm sorry, folks. I cannot take this seriously, and I just find it amazing. And you know what? Go figure that Fox News wanted to be all over this story because it manages to insult black people and trans people at the same time in different ways. Oh my God. Now, at the beginning of all of this, I did mention Keith Abloh and Fox News. And for those of you who don't know Keith Abloh, he's a douchebag. That's my clinical psychological analysis of Fox News' resident psychiatrist, Dr. Keith Abloh. He is a disgraced douchebag. All right, and he, of course, was the first one to jump on all the transgender, transracial conflation. But I also mentioned Eric Erickson. And Eric Erickson earlier today was saying, this was a piece on Media Matters, that society's acceptance of transgender people is what's blinded us to the evil that happened in South Carolina. He's talking, of course, about the church shooting. And I'm like, now, wait a second. If our maybe transracial, did he mean... I don't know what he's fucking talking about. Anything to avoid acknowledging the racial aspect of it, I suppose. I don't know how these people connect these things, but I tell you, for all the fire and brimstone, you know, for the couple that's going to get divorced, for the pastor that's going to light himself on fire, actually, and for Glenn Beck's 10,000 preachers who are going to all commit suicide over gay marriage and whatnot. You know, what's going to happen where are we going to remember as a society when we finally have gay marriage and everything's accepted and everyone's equal, and we have transgender people and they're taken care of and they're not discriminated against, their medical needs are met, and like literally nothing happens except society is slightly more peaceful and people are on average marginally happier? Are we going to remember all of this fire and brimstone stuff? I kind of hope we do. And I want to end on a religious note. Not exactly. I kind of want to end on an unreligious note. And this is Tony Campolo's reversal on LGBT inclusion. Now, some of you may not know Tony Campolo. He's basically on par with Billy Graham when it comes to Baptist and fundamentalist and evangelical Christians. And he's been a fire and brimstone guy for a long time. And he's recently sort of reversed himself on LGBT inclusion, basically saying we should no longer be trying to convert people. He's seen the harm that it's done. It's not a sin to be gay, but it's absolutely a sin to harm people with you know, all of this stuff. And he's basically come around on it. Okay, and he's come a lot farther even than Pope Francis, who basically never said it was okay. He just said, let's stop making such a big deal about it. Then, of course, that same Pope Francis compared transgender people to nuclear weapons, which was so much hyperbole, I almost couldn't even be mad about it. I'm like, come on, guys, if you're going to be denigrated or something, I mean, come on, you're a fucking nuclear missile. Isn't that awesome? The Pope thinks you're nuclear missiles. That's fucking cool. But Tony Campolo reversed himself on this, and this is what the article that I was reading on this said, that basically this is going to change American Christianity, blah, blah. No, it's not. Come on. All this is going to do is result in Tony Campolo's reduction of importance within the movement. He's just going to be, I mean, a couple people will go with him. Don't get me wrong. I suppose it's good. But here's the thing I wonder about, and I'm going to leave you with this thought. And this is one of these things, I always define an extremist as somebody who would rather like let the enemy have everything than compromise with somebody who's like just a little bit off from where they are. In other words, this is the kind of like, I can understand why fundamentalist Christians hate Muslims, but what I really don't understand was they seem to hate Christians who are kind of like them, but a little bit different even more. Catholics in particular. But it's amazing to me that these really whack job Christians, I swear to God, they hate other Christians worse than anybody. Read your Jack Chick tracts and whatnot, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, I've always said that's sort of the definition of extremist, right? That you'd rather let everything burn than compromise. And I guess by that definition, I'm an extremist when it comes to religion. Now, I'm not a religious guy. I've said it before, and I'm not an atheist. I think atheism has the same arrogance that organized religion has. It's not God that I have a problem with, or the belief in God. It's organized religion. It's religion that I have an issue with. And religion in all forms. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck and says the Our Father like a duck, it's a religion. Okay? We don't need to quibble on that. So, when I hear that religion is softening its stance on gay rights, okay? When I hear that religion wants to be more inclusive of women, when I hear that religion, and this is not a new trend. I mean, religion has been getting rid of stupid bullshit for 2,000 years. Go and read the Bible. In the words of Reverend Lovejoy, have you ever read this thing, Homer? Everything is a sin. Technically, we're not even allowed to go to the bathroom. And there's a website out there. You can look it up. I think it was called 600 Laws or something like that. And it listed out 600 laws in the Old Testament. And of course, you read them, and most of them are the don't wear mixed fabrics, don't eat shrimp, don't consume vegetables that have insects that swarm around them or some shit like that. It's a lot of goofy nonsense, Don't shave on Tuesday, stuff that we don't really enforce anymore. But for some reason, we still enforce the stuff on gays. Not divorce, not adultery so much, but gays, oh no, can't have that. King Solomon can have 700 wives, but 2 men can't marry. No, can't do that. That would be immoral. So the thing is, they're softening on this, and I should be happy about this. I should say this is a positive thing, that something that is oppressive is moving in the right direction. And yet, part of me kind of regrets when that happens. And I'm just saying this because this makes me a really terrible person. And I think you should know that about me. I don't really want the church to change. I want society to change, don't get me wrong, but I kind of want the church to stay the same. Because you know what? Ultimately, I kind of want a society where everybody's free to believe what they want and there really isn't much of a church left. I know that thought's going to bother people, and I guess I'm kind of torn about it. I mean, it is a good thing that the church evolves, but to me, because I believe in evolution, I realize that evolution is the key to survival. And organized religion, not belief, not faith, not spirituality, but organized religion is not something I really think has been a positive influence on society. A lot of people will think I'm crazy for that, but I take the Hitchens view, and believe me, I'm not a fan of Hitchens. If Chris Hitchens was ever talking about anything other than religion, he was nothing but a drunken douchebag. But when he was talking about religion, I think he made a good point. And I'm going to leave you with my thought on religion, which is that in a secular society, men of goodwill will do good things, and men of evil will, as Hitchens put it, continue to shirk their civic duties. But to get a good man to do evil things, you need to give him religion. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, I know religion does a lot of good, but again, the good in religion is shared with secular humanism. What separates religion from secular humanism is all the stupid bullshit. Okay? Well, if you get rid of all the stupid bullshit, is there really any difference between religion and secular humanism aside from something about a holy book and a man in the sky? I don't know that there is. Is that good? Is that bad? I'm not sure. But unfortunately, it kind of lets religion linger and co-opt the values of secular humanism. I don't know. I suppose it should be. I should be pleased that there are people like Pope Francis, people like Tony Campolo, who are finally coming around on these things. It will make life better in the short term and in the long term. And I should be happy about it. Like I say, guys, sometimes you have to recognize your own extremism, and this is something that I guess I just don't want to let it go. Oh well. Anyway, I'm going to let you go. I want you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And as always, if you have any questions or comments about anything you've heard on the show or suggestions for future guests or topics, please email me. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at niceguy9418@usa.com. You can friend me on Facebook at Eddie Cabot. You can also leave a comment on my blog at eddiecabot.blogspot.com. So good afternoon and enjoy the rest of your Sunday here on Rainbow Radio.